Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Kate Bruns, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I am so pleased to welcome you to this event with James Rodger Fleming, discussing his latest book, First Woman, Joanne Simpson and the Tropical Atmosphere, with a special introduction from Harvard University's Janet Brown. Tonight's event is the latest installment in our Harvard Science Book Talk series, which works to bring the authors of recently published science-related literature to our Cambridge community and beyond. Coming up in the series on Tuesday, November 10th, we will be virtually hosting cosmologist John Levin for a discussion of her new book, Black Hole Survival Guide. To learn more about these and other upcoming events, you can sign up for the bookstore's email newsletter at harvard.com or visit the webpage harvard.com/science for more information. We also have a science research public lecture series YouTube page where you can see previous talks that you might have missed. This evening's event will conclude with some time for your questions. If you would like to ask Jim something, please go to the Q&A chat at the bottom of the screen where you can submit a question. We're going to get through as many as time allows for. Also, once the event begins, I will post a link in the chat to purchase tonight's featured book, First Woman. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so a huge thank you for your support. Your purchases and your financial contributions, there will also be a donate link in the chat, make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever support the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you to our partners at Harvard University, and thank you to all of you for tuning in and showing up for authors, indie bookselling, and especially for science, because it really matters. And finally, as you might have experienced in virtual gatherings the last few weeks, technical issues can arise, and if they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you for your patience and your understanding. So now I am very excited to turn things over to Harvard's own Janet Brown. She is the Aramont Professor of the History of Science at Harvard and a renowned Charles Darwin scholar. Janet, the digital podium is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for organizing all of this. And welcome, everybody. How nice to know that you're here. We can't see you, but it's a thrill that we're all part of this wonderful event. I've got the delightful task of introducing Jim to you, Jim Fleming, who's the Charles A. Dana Professor of Science, Technology and Society at Colby College in Maine, and is a distinguished historian of meteorology and climate. Jim, as we've heard, and as you of course know, is here to discuss his latest book, which is about Joanne Simpson. It's called First Woman, Joanne Simpson and the Tropical Atmosphere, published 2 weeks ago by Oxford University Press. And you, like me, may well have asked yourself, so who is Joanne Simpson? And this is what we're here to find out. Jim brings a wealth of experience to the scholarly study of the atmosphere. He began as an astronomer and subsequently brought himself a little closer to Earth by researching atmospheric science and climate as a postdoc. And then he became a historian of science, interested in the history of those people who struggled to understand the sky and the weather. He's based at Colby, as I said, but he's currently a visitor here in the History of Science department at Harvard, or more properly, he's a virtual visitor. He's talking to us tonight from Maine, from his home in Maine. Now, Jim's written numerous pioneering books on climate science and atmospheric phenomena, including The Foundations of Modern Meteorology in 2016 for MIT Press, and Fixing the Sky, The Checkered History of Weather and Climate Control for Columbia Press in 2010. He's been an important commentator on our current climate predicament from the start, someone who combines the cultural consciousness of the humanities with the scientific particulars. And this is what we will be encountering in his talk tonight. And he turned to Joanne Simpson, perhaps he'll tell us this, when he realized that her name is mostly overlooked, if not completely forgotten, in the histories, perhaps because she was a woman, perhaps because she worked on tropical air masses, or perhaps because of her dynamic and unusual life story. He's done amazing work to bring her back into focus. She was the first woman to earn a Ph.D. in meteorology, the first to recognize the importance of tropical storms, and one of the first to fly airplanes into the clouds in order to study them. So, as a group, we all know how fundamental the climate is. And in this era of increasingly intense weather of every description, we're an audience who is anxious to know more about the people who generate the theories and think about the results. So Jim, please tell us more about your book. Over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Janet. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. And thank you, Kate, for hosting me at the Harvard Bookstore. It's great to be on sabbatical at Harvard, even virtually. It's great to have a new book to launch. And it's great that you all are here. Even though I can't see you, I hope that you'll be in touch with me either during the Q&A or afterwards if you'd like to send me a note. I really miss live events, but this is what we have. And it's great for me to have about a 15-second commute up from the living room to my study. I studied history of science at Princeton. I attended the Smithsonian Institution where I added sort of history of technology to my kit. And then the Wilson Center hosted me for a year and I was able to work on public policy. So those three things kind of are my bellywick, where I work on history of science, technology, and public policy. Before that, though, I studied atmospheric science for a master's degree at Colorado State, which was the department that Herb Rio founded, and he was Joanne's mentor for her PhD. I studied the tropical atmosphere, in fact, and I was able to study clouds and fly in clouds. And I was able to meet Joanne in her presidency of the American Meteorological Society, but I never thought I would write a book about her until much later when I realized that she had tremendous resources and she had helped develop them at the Radcliffe Institute. So I keep up on weather and climate science, and I work on the history of science and technology. And I'd like to, before I start the talk proper, I would like to acknowledge my tremendous research assistants I have had at Colby College who would help me immensely in getting this book together. So with that, I'll start a sharing screen and I'll give you a few slides and a talk about Joanne. Okay, we practiced this in advance, but am I sharing my screen? Can somebody give me a heads up? I don't want to go on for 20 minutes without having the screen shared. Thanks, Kate. Okay, so thank you very much for hosting me. My email is right there, jfleming@colby.edu. And if you don't get your questions answered, or if you'd like to follow up, please get in touch with me. This is the cover of the book, and it just came out on October 4th, so it's right off the press. And I have a little opening statement. Clouds are the spark plugs in the heat engine of the tropical atmosphere. And heat from the tropics drives the planet's general circulation. Atmospheric scientists didn't know this in the 1950s, but Joanne Simpson, the first American woman to earn a PhD in meteorology, did. Most histories of meteorology focus on polar and temperate regions and the accomplishments of male scientists. They marginalize or erase completely the contributions of female researchers. Joanne Simpson's work on the tropical atmosphere did not fit this pattern. So my new book examines Simpson's personal and professional life, her career prospects as a woman in science, and her relationship to the tropical atmosphere. These three multifaceted and interacting textual streams constitute a braided narrative that displays surprisingly emergent properties. Is Joanne Simpson best remembered as a pioneer woman scientist who mentored a great generation of meteorologists and blazed a trail for other women? Or was she simply the best tropical scientist of her generation? She was both, with the emphasis on best scientist. And here's Joanne in action. She's in the cockpit of a research airplane, ready to go. Her lifespan is there at the top of the screen, born in 1923 and passed away 10 years ago. But in 1943, women had no status in meteorology. Tropical weather was not widely studied, and Joanne Gerold, a new graduate student at the University of Chicago, had just set her sights on understanding the behavior of clouds. Establishing a career in an era of overwhelming marginalization of women in science was no easy matter. And Joanne, who published under three married names, her CV has three entries with three names of her husbands, and she raised three children. She had to fight every step of the way. Under the mentorship of Herbert Real, she received a Ph.D. from Chicago in 1949. Later, while working at Woods Hole, she collaborated with Real on their revolutionary and controversial hot tower hypothesis that holds that cumulonimbus clouds, the big thunder clouds, were the driving force in the tropical atmosphere and provided energy for the whole of the atmosphere. This idea of hot towers alludes to the incessant battle between buoyancy and entrainment in tropical convection. So buoyancy is the force moving the clouds upward. Entrainment is the dry air that can come into the cloud and pull it back down. And so the tropical convection theory valorizes those clouds that successfully break through the trade wind inversion and make their way to the top of the atmosphere. These hot towers are quite rare. The little popcorn, fair weather, tropical cumulus clouds are quite common. So Joanne, metaphorically, was a hot tower kind of individual who rose to the very top of her work. It also points to, the metaphor points to the incessant battles that she waged between her sky-high aspirations and her dark psychological and institutional forces that were dragging her down. Yet she prevailed, attaining personal and professional accomplishments, especially in her years at NASA, where she directed the Tropical Rainfall Measuring Mission satellite program. And just a word about the Joanne Simpson papers. They're over at Radcliffe Institute. And in 1992, the Schlesinger Library identified Joanne as a pioneer woman in science, a very notable figure. And her papers include her diaries, revelations about her health, accounts of her conflicts with her family, captioned photographs, scrapbooks, research notebooks, and several artifacts, including a silver iodide cloud seeding flare. I'll come to that in a minute, and her ballet shoes. It's a candid, comprehensive personal collection that's not self-serving. It contains extensive evidence and materials on the tropical atmosphere as well as women in meteorology. And it has important implications, I feel, for gender studies, mentorship, and for the use and construction of archives. And basically, I think Joanne was too astute to try to write her own autobiography. She put copious materials into the archives. And there's even a letter there that says, I trust that in the future, some historian will work with this material and bring it to focus. And so I really enjoyed reading that letter because I felt like I was doing that for her. And then I have to deal with the title, First Woman. And I'm gonna, Janet Brown already mentioned a few firsts, but Joanne constructed the first digital cloud model using the Swedish BESS computer. Now, much of history of computing and meteorology deals with the numerical weather prediction and the work done at Princeton in the Institute for Advanced Study. But this was the first cloud model that was a cloud model of convection done in the early 1950s. She was also the first woman at Woods Hole to fly on Navy planes and to lead a research team. She was a PI. She was a principal investigator. She was the first woman to receive an NSF grant in support of atmospheric research, and the first woman to win the Carl Gustav Rossby Research Medal, the top award given by the American Meteorological Society. She was the first female meteorologist inducted into the National Academy of Engineering, and the first female president of the American Meteorological Society, and the first woman to win the coveted International Meteorological Organization Prize, an award that's only given every decade. She did this by combining intellectual curiosity with hard work and dogged determination, all in a field dominated by men. And when I got into the archives, my interest was piqued by the first box and the first folder, where she's talking about her interviews and how much she's been interviewed about her work and got involved in how she feels about it. But she never felt that the interviews gave a full or balanced picture because the feeling and the heart side are almost left out. These are her words. They give the impression that I am an ambitious, single-minded scientist. Colleagues and close friends must be aware that my personal life had to have been tempestuous at times to survive 2 divorces. However, I think I'm generally perceived as a pretty cool character. Nothing could be further from the truth, she added. This is where it really got interesting, because I wanted to see how she was thinking about the other parts of her life beside the things that you could find on her resume. To understand how a woman, or a man for that matter, creates original work in any field, it's necessary to penetrate the emotional masks. And my masks have intentionally been hard to penetrate. I propose to take them off insofar as that is possible. And she kept the masks hard to penetrate because of her liminal status in the field and her desire to rise to the very top of the field and not let that sort of metaphorically, that dry air into her convective bubble. But in her 70s, when she felt comfortable with this and she began to construct an archive, she proposed to take off those masks and let the truth come out, let the details come out. That's box 1 of the Simpson papers, which was really a wonderful collection. And we could get there in about 3 hours by bus coming down from Colby. You could bring students, we could put on our white gloves, and we could look at the photographs and work with the materials. The bare bones of her career start out with her childhood in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she was born there, 1923. Her studies were at the University of Chicago, where she took a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate between 1940 and 1949. And then her first work as a research meteorologist was at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. She had a full professorship at UCLA, but it didn't work too well for her. She had a job at NOAA, which is the National Weather Service, for a very long time. For 10 years at NOAA, she was in charge of experimental meteorology, trying to modify clouds and see what they would do. And then she had a named professorship at the University of Virginia, which also didn't work out the way she had hoped. She ended her career with NASA at the Goddard Space Flight Center, and she was able to have her own tropical satellite, the first radar flying in space. But that's the bare bones. I'd like to give you a sense of her life. She has a family album. She annotated the photos, and this is the first picture of her. She has her mother's famous teddy bear. This was a Teddy Roosevelt original teddy bear that her mother never gave her, but let her hold and play with once in a while, especially when she was sick. So she was a Cambridge girl, and this is her baby picture. Her mother was active in the women's movement at the time and was a professionally trained journalist. And Joanne remembers the most traumatic event was when she was getting a bath, and her mother was bathing her brother, who was born at about age 5, when she was 5, and she was snuggling him and kissing him in the process. She had never snuggled and kissed me, and I asked my mother, "Why do you love him so much and you don't love me?" Her reply seared like a heavy corroding acid in my chest for decades after. Her reply was, I love him because he's lovable. You have to be lovable to be loved. The way she spoke gave me a clear message that I was unlovable as a permanent condition. I spent a substantial part of my life trying to make myself lovable or even likable to her. So this was a psychological trauma. This was something that happened when she was 5. It was a lack of, of of motherly love, basically, and she spent her life uh, trying to prove to her mother that she was indeed worthy and that she was lovable. And to her credit, by her later life, she was able to come to reconciliation with her mother, even though her mother never reconciled with her. Her father was a different story. Her father was enormously accomplished aviation reporter for the Boston Herald, and I'm sorry, the Boston Globe. And his father took Joanne swimming, rowing out to sea, and there was a lot of affection there with Joanne and her father. So she labels this picture a very important picture of 2-year-old Joanne with her father, Russell Gerold. My mother didn't kiss me at night. I can't remember feeling any warmth or affection from her. However, occasionally she got furiously angry with me. So there's a real edge in these captions. There's a real edge in the archive, and she's really trying to reveal her inner feelings. There's a picture of her at about age 5 when her brother was born, and she labels it, this is in Cambridge, Mass, a sad-looking girl who felt sad at the time, dejected. I was very sick with the measles, and her mother let her hold the Teddy Roosevelt teddy bear as kind of a comforting moment. She was intended to go to Radcliffe. Her grandmother was a Radcliffe trained person. Her mother was Radcliffe, and Joanne was expected to go to Radcliffe after finishing in Cambridge school, and she went to Chicago. She took off, and that was a big surprise to her family. She wanted to get away and have a new start, and she left Chicago. She left Cambridge for Chicago, and was able to study meteorology, but not at first. She was fascinated by the Great Books program there, and she was losing a lot of her colleagues. A lot of her people that she knew were in the Pacific War. She went to Chicago in 1940, and they were uh, in a hot war soon after that. So she wanted to join the World War II effort. And she thought maybe she would join the Waves, maybe she could get a desk job. The roles for women in the war effort were pretty prescribed. And she went to visit Carl Gustav Rossby, probably the most famous meteorologist of the mid-20th century, maybe one of the most famous of all. And he convinced her to get into the weather training program, the cadet training, to train a whole cadre of people that could do forecasting for the war around the world. And she took the war course. She was only 19 at the time. So in the summer of 1942, she had to take 2 physics courses and a math course as a crash course, and then join the war emergency training session in the fall. And by the spring, she was teaching that course. She was teaching the course at New York University. She came back to Chicago after the war and married a meteorologist, Victor Starr, who's actually quite a famous theoretician, worked with Rossby, and they had a child. But the university was not prepared to have a student in the department. She was then taking her master's degree. So they wouldn't let her in there with the child, and she had all kinds of problems as a married woman in the Department of All Men. She didn't learn about nepotism rules until she married Victor, and that forced her out of her job at Chicago. So they both could not be working in the same university at the time. So she moved to Illinois Institute of Technology and found a way to teach physics and meteorology there. Her graduate student advisor, now imagine this, if you're a graduate student, Michael Ferencz told her, no woman has ever earned a PhD in meteorology, no woman ever will. And even if you did, no one would give you a job. I mean, talk about advising, talk about uplifting message. This was not. And so she struggled quite a bit. She struggled to make ends meet. Victor Starr was not a good provider, and they ended up divorcing. So she's a single woman trying to get her master's degree and then trying to get her PhD with a child in arms and working at Illinois Institute of Tech to make ends meet. And a senior colleague told her it's ironic to see the brain of a man in the body of a woman. It's a tragedy. And this was another example of the kind of messages she was receiving from the men around her. She married again. She married physicist Willem Malkus, who was a graduate student at Chicago, and they had a second child, Stephen, at the time. This is about 1950 by this time. So she got her PhD. She had the war training. She had the war effort. She really was working to make ends meet. And in a seminar on tropical meteorology, she met Herbert Reel. Reel was the founder of the department I studied in. And Reel was talking about trade wind clouds and new data that he had gotten and a new theory of cloud entrainment. That's the theory of the dry air mixing with the moist. And Joanne says that there was a light bulb came on above her head and she shouted, "Eureka, this is what I want to study for the rest of my life." I think from even objective measures, this was a moment that she made a turn because Rossby and Starr wanted her to work on theory, and Joanne wanted to fly in the clouds and wanted to study the clouds up close and personal. And she was able to do that at Woods Hole. Rossby, who was, as I mentioned, was the most famous meteorologist of his day, said to Joanne later, he says, "Your work on cumulus clouds is a fine field for a little girl. They're unimportant, so no one else is interested, and you can stand out like a sore thumb." Well, it turned out that Rossby was wrong, and Joanne brought clouds and the dynamics of clouds and the action that clouds play in the heat budget of the planet into mainstream meteorology. She actually brought the tropics and all they meant into the world of northern temperate meteorology. So people don't say, you know, people don't say I'm a meteorologist is what they'll say. They won't say I'm a tropical meteorologist unless they're studying that area of the world. Or you might say I study polar meteorology, but she was able to bring the different parts of the dynamics of the world together. If you looked at tropical meteorology in 1950, you wouldn't see that much. There were three basic theories that basically the climatological approach that weather would be about the same as it is today as it is yesterday and varies very little from average conditions. It was descriptive climatology. This is a long tradition. There was also this attempt to bring the high latitude air mass theories from the Bergen, Norway's program into the tropics. And there was a search for this mythical equatorial front. There was also, the Rossby School was looking for upper air perturbations that would generate the surface weather. They were looking for these easterly waves that come off of Africa and disturb the conditions at the surface in the Atlantic. So this was a theoretical approach, but there was really no measurements and no ability to forecast tomorrow's tropical weather. Now, why was that necessary? It's because in World War II, the Navy was very active in the tropical Pacific. After World War II, we were detonating bombs, testing bombs in the Pacific. There was a real push to get an ability to forecast the winds and the directions down there. So this was an important field to get into, and Joanne really got in at the very beginning. By 1960, she was doing these on-site observations and making models of trade winds and hurricanes, and she was also experimenting, putting these perturbing clouds so that she could see what they would do in the future. When she first got to Woods Hole, I mean, she was a married lady, but she met this photographer, Claude Ronnet, and he was just so dashing. She said it was truly love at first sight, and they began an intellectual and romantic affair that lasted for decades. They flew on missions together in the Caribbean and the Pacific. They passed notes across the airplane's aisles. They danced, listened to classical music, talked all night, and maintained a complex love and friendship unlike any other in her life. These are documented in real time in 3 handwritten diaries that were made only available in 2015. I was in the archive in October 2015, and I said, "What's that red box? It says closed, restricted, do not open." And they said, "Oh, that's a personal file that she has restricted." I said, "When is the restriction raised?" And they said, January 2015. I said, "Well, this is October, so bring me the box." And inside the box were the 3 handwritten diaries, notes, cards, and some exchanges that I have transcribed these. It's kind of a companion to the book. I have the documents on my computer, but I call them thoughts and feelings because they're more than just love letters. They're psychoanalyzing each other, Claude, the photographer, and Joanne, the tropical scientist, and they're working together. They were a pair really for at least 2 decades after that. And here's the display of their flying together. This is Joanne as the principal investigator, and they're on their way to the tropics with their Navy surplus plane. It's called a PBY, like a flying boat. And Claude is here, second from the left, and then the flight crew, the pilots and the men. So when Joanne joined this crew, the Woods Hole people didn't want to have her fly. They had a policy of no women on their ships or their airplanes. But the Navy, the Office of Naval Research, basically said, if Joanne doesn't go, the plane doesn't come to your institute. So this is fully documented in the book. I just want to give you a flavor that they were flying in a very slow moving surplus airplane, and using the airplane itself to try to gauge their speed and their updraft and the measurement in the clouds. Claude was a photographer. And this is from the diaries, and I put quite a bit of this into the book, and it's really something I've been interested in the interior life of scientists, but I usually can't find that much information about it. But she came back from her field campaigns radiant with happiness and talked about the candlelight dinners and how she felt like a princess. This is right out of the diary, dancing. I'll be dancing with you in the darkness when I think about it from now on. And we were exhausted and dizzy and held on to each other. It's really a romance. And she asked, why is doing anything with you make that same act under other circumstances afterwards seem flat by contrast? So she treasured these moments, and she wrote about them for the next 20 years in the diaries. I couldn't put everything in there, but I did put a flavor of what she was feeling and how much she had actually found a romantic love through Claude. They went hunting together. They hitchhiked across the Pacific and in the Military Airlift Command, and the planes took them across the Pacific in 1957. They were hitchhiking, basically stopping in naval air bases and waiting for the next flight to take them to Guam and to Hawaii and across the Pacific. And they were looking for these clouds. They were photographing clouds and trying to make a documentary of the cloud structures and behaviors. This is what I meant by trade wind cumulus, the little fair weather clouds that are very, very common in the tropics. And this is what I meant by hot towers, the big booming cumulonimbus clouds that are really quite rare, but really quite energetic. And this is what they were photographing and discovering and looking at the trade winds in the Pacific to try to uncover their dynamics. And one little science slide, because this is a Harvard science talk. My basic point about the tropical atmosphere is that it's stable, except when it isn't, and that the giant updrafts are balanced by all that downdraft, all the small little clouds balance the large clouds, and so you end up with kind of a upward and downward balance of flows. The problem is studying the violent phenomena, the strong updrafts is very, very challenging. You could think of these as the thunderstorms, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, the actual quite rare events, the one-off events, and most of the time, the rest of the atmosphere is really quite well behaved. Joanne mapped all these things out. She put them into a book that she published in the 60s. And here she is on the CBS Conquest program It was a short science program on CBS television. And she's here demonstrating how she was making the cloud films projected and gridded to create the maps that she had. Now, one of Joanne's very close associates, Peggy Lemon, works at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And she was kind enough to grant me an interview. I was using a video camera and just asked her a question about how did you first encounter Joanne? So Peggy's in her office. You can see right above her head, there's a little cartoon cloud on the blackboard. And she's talking about clouds. She followed Joanne's career and worked together very closely with Joanne. And this little excerpt is little over a minute. I'd like to play it for you.
And looking at clouds and talking about clouds, and she studied clouds. And I thought, you can do that? That's what I want to do. Okay, anytime. Is it already starting?
Go ahead.
Okay. I learned only fairly recently that a film that influenced me strongly as a child had Joanne Simpson in the movie. It would have been somewhere around the mid to late 1950s. And I was in my brother's bedroom. He was an electronics whiz. He liked to put together things, and he had a TV put together in his bedroom. And I was sitting on the floor, and on came this fascinating piece about clouds. And there was a woman looking at steam coming up from a cup of coffee and talking about clouds. And there were pictures of clouds and airplanes flying through clouds. And she was talking about how she studied clouds. And I was just totally delighted, because from the time when I was about 8 years old, when the lightning struck our house, I'd been fascinated by weather. But I didn't know if girls could be meteorologists. It almost seemed like there's something wrong with that. But there she was, and she seemed to be quite coherent, and she seemed to know what she was doing. And I think that made me far more comfortable with the decision to become a meteorologist. So by the time I was 13 years old, in 7th grade, and they asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wrote meteorologist. I think I might have had to ask the teacher to help me spell it. But that desire continued, and that's what I am today.
Okay, so that was Peggy Lemon, and she is a colleague of Joanne. Just to remind you, I'm gonna move quickly through the rest of her career. She was granted a full professorship at UCLA with her husband, Wilhelm Malkus, and that really broke a kind of a nepotism barrier at UCLA. But she wasn't happy. She lost her close-knit community. She lost her close-knit community at Woods Hole, and then followed that by a gig with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, working on experimental meteorology, trying to make it rain. And then back to the University of Virginia, seeking to escape from some government bureaucracy. She got an endowed professorship, but it was in a university that was really behind the times and didn't welcome her there as a female professor. She ended up at NASA, as I mentioned. So I'm going to move on. She started to collect honors at this point and became AMS president. I think this is when I first met her. There's Joanne in the front row with all the former presidents, and they're all men. And so she was really standing out, and she was outstanding at the same time. She led the society forward and really was able to work with Peggy Lemon to make a committee on women and minorities in the science. So she was active in carving out a role for women in meteorology. She won the Rossby Medal in 1983, and it was 17 years until the next person won it in 2000. She was elected to the National Academy in 1988, and it was 8 years passed until the next person was elected to the Academy. She was president of the society, as I mentioned, 89, 90, and it was 15 years until the next female president. and she won the international prize in 2002, and it was 7 years till the next winner. So this is really just a simple graphic that shows how far in advance she was of the rest of the field. This is her work at NASA. I don't have time to cover everything else, but a joint project between NASA and the Japanese Space Agency developed this tropical rainfall measuring mission. I think the thing of note right now is that it was the first radar in space. It was absolutely the first radar. It flew around the equator and looked down on storms. So this is a tropical hurricane. This is a tropical cyclone with the hot towers in red, with the embedded gigantic cumulus clouds showing up in red, and the rest of the storm showing up in three-dimensional relief here. This was her baby. This was what she really wanted to do. And at NASA, she was given full command over this. The tropics are half the world's area, half the world's people. And this satellite was both a humanitarian effort to understand tropical weather better, and that was a scientific effort. I have one more little video clip of a fellow that worked with her, Jeff Halverson. He's now a professor, a very distinguished professor at University of Maryland. And I just simply asked him, what was it like to work with Joanne? And then I set the camera running.
So what was it like to work with Joanne at NASA, the postdoc years, I call them, because I had 6-7 years working with Joanne. I stayed at Goddard for an extended postdoc period just because she was there and we were working on exciting things. We were flying in these hurricanes, we were collecting the data, we would come back, analyze the data, and it was a very interesting process working with Joanne. She had a huge office, huge office, and she had an assistant and all that, but all on the walls around her were her books, and then she had one shelf that she would call precious books, and the precious books were never, ever to be loaned out to anyone. That's why they were called precious books, and that shelf was labeled as such, right? And of course, you had, the Real and Malchus, and you had, all the classics there from tropical meteorology. Well, anyway, the working process with all these huge binders of data. We had computers back then, but Joanne and I were kind of tactile. We'd like to put out analysis charts and ASCII, runs of data, and that's just getting into it, right? So we could write on it and circle things, and we would talk about a storm. We were trying to build a hypothesis chain and talk about this process leading to such process. And we would just open up the folders and pull out what we needed. And on the floor, she and I got down on knees and just spread this stuff out. And the images of the hurricanes, the SCUT plots, the data, we would just organize this stuff in a way that constructed a conceptual hypothesis chain. This is proving this, and this leads to this, and here's the evidence for this. And it was just an amazing way to do science. You just get down on the floor with your mentor and say, we're going to look at stuff. And we didn't care who was walking by, who was looking. That's just how we did the science. And that's one of the most amazing things I remember about Joanne is this: we could just lose ourselves for hours, just talking nothing but science and looking at data. And she had the most amazing amount of enthusiasm and motivation. It was infectious. I caught the bug, right? And then I would feed back to her because she saw my excitement, and that would keep her going. And so that's how we published a lot of our papers.
Cool. Okay, and she basically retired twice. She retired from NASA, and she retired from NOAA, and then she retired from NASA. And this was her very close colleague, Christina Katsaros, who, with her husband, they made this cartoon on the time of her retirement. And basically, it shows the optimist knocking on doors or not getting through, the intrepid woman trying to knock the wall down, and then Joanne, the wise woman, flying right over it and doing something that nobody else had done. So this was a cartoon that Christina gave me the original copy of this one. That she was happy she actually found fulfillment. She reconciled with her mother. Their third husband, Bob Simpson, was a hurricane specialist. And so Joanne was really quite happy working in the tropical atmosphere. and they were happy together in their older age. She had grandchildren, and at her retirement party, a colleague gave her this quote from Thoreau, suitably annotated to change his to her. If one advances confidently in the direction of her dreams and endeavors to live the life which she has imagined, she will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. So Joanne had to ask herself, was it all worth it? Was the effort, the struggle, the divorces, some of the medical problems she had, some of the challenges she met, some of the chilly atmosphere developed by the men in their life, and she basically concluded, yes, it was truly all worthwhile. Um, Joanne Simpson passed away in 2010. The book is really about her life, her work, her passions, and her working out of these issues. And it's also, I think, an example of how you can construct a life story out of a very rich and personal archive. So I thank you for your attention, and we're going to open it up for any comments or questions from the group. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we have started receiving questions from the audience, but just a reminder that if you do have a question, you can submit it in the Q&A box down here. One question from attendee that we have, Jim, is, are there any other women scientists you feel are particularly overlooked that you would encourage us to learn more about?
I think they're legion. There's a study. My specialty was in meteorology, and now we haven't turned the corner entirely, but there certainly are more Ph.D.s in meteorology who are female. There's not that many senior people yet, but the tide has turned, I think, circa 1990s or so. There are a plethora of women in meteorology who worked from the war effort from World War II on, but they were sort of metaphorically like the trade wind cumulus. They could rise to a certain level, but they could never get much higher. And so I think the person I had on video here, Peggy Limon, would be a great subject in meteorology. And the film Hidden Figures, there's a lot more attention now to people that deserve more attention. Joanne did receive a lot of acclaim and attention in her own lifetime, but putting together this biography of hers was both it was, and I wanted to be critical about it too, but she had left such a wonderful archive, and decided not to write her autobiography. But I think that if you're going to look for a subject like this, you should look for the documentation. You should have access to it. I was asking initially when I first started, I was asking a lot of people about her, because she was a great mentor, and all her mentees were saying, oh, she was wonderful. Yes, she was great. Yes, she was energetic. And I needed more nuance than that. So I started the little video vignettes. There's a YouTube video collection out there called Joanne Simpson Vignettes, and they are footnoted in the book. So you can go from the book to the video. And I think that might be a technique to use for recently deceased or living protagonists. But yeah, there's a lot of people.
We have a question from Mildine, who asks, can you describe the narrative structure that you use to tell Joanne's story? It's an interesting question.
The narrative structure, I tried to hint at it in the beginning of the talk by the symbol phrase from her, nothing could be further from the truth. So it was sort of building a bare bones structure from her CV, and noting the 3 different names on her resume and the different major accomplishments. And so I knew from the beginning it was going to be kind of a success story and a struggle at the same time. And so I called it a blended narrative, where the story of women in meteorology, the story of Joanne's life herself, and the story of uncovering the tropical atmosphere for the modern world. Yeah, so if I was going to do a history of modern meteorology, I would have 10,000 articles from 3,000 scientists And I decided that in this case, I would follow Joanne's trajectory and talk about the science as she experienced it. So I think the structure was to establish, to put up a superstructure, to put up a structure based on her CV, but to deal seriously with her emotional challenges and her overcoming of different kind of goals, not just all professional.
We have a question here from Naomi Oreskes. Naomi says, "Hi, Jim. Great talk. Can you say a bit more about her choice to work on tropical meteorology? In other words, do you want to argue that she was wise enough to see the important questions that her male colleagues missed, or that she was more or less forced to work on things that male colleagues had left open, but she was talented enough to make something significant with it?"
Yeah, thanks a lot, and hi, Naomi. No, I don't see so much of the forcing. I think she was forcing it through her master's degree, which she really didn't like. She was working under Rossby. He was indicating that there's a lot of interesting theoretical issues out there, but she didn't want to work on just the theory, and she didn't also want to work with her husband, Victor Starr, on theory. And so I read it as partly as a great opportunity, and she ended up scooping Rossby. I don't know if she knew she was going to do that in the long run, but she scooped Rossby. Rossby just had arrows and diagrams, and he didn't have the real mechanism. He didn't have the place where the moisture meets the dynamics. And she got that by flying into the clouds and by going out into the clouds. And so she just felt a need to do that. But I think there's an emotional thread in there as well. And so I mean, when I advise my students to take on a project, I say, write your passion, pick up something that you can really be excited about as you're going through the whole, whatever it is, thesis process or writing a book. And if that's not in there, but Joanne was really passionate in a number of ways. She was passionate about Reel's, the light bulb came on when Reel was talking there about the tropics. But also the light bulb came on in a different way when she met Claude, and she realized she could go flying with him and photograph clouds. So there's an emotional thought side to this. And I think it's not just a logical choice or a forced choice or a rational choice, but I think it's really a human choice. And she found her way of and becoming the PI, the head of an entire aircraft program. And as the rewards were coming in, as she was getting this feedback, it just led to a very, very energetic life. She just worked and produced, and it's really an amazing story of synergy.
Thank you. Okay, now we have a ton of questions.
Good.
Woo! All right. We have a question from Steve who asks, was Joanne the first woman to direct a NASA satellite development program?
I believe so. She went to NASA in 1979, and she was recruited for her talent in tropical dynamics. She became head of the severe storms branch, but certainly her managerial. There's other testimonies about her as a sort of a fierce competitor in the government circles. She had learned through the experience with the government, and her husband was a director of a national hurricane lab. She had learned how to make things work, with the budget cuts. She lived through the budget cuts of the Reagan era. She chafed at other sorts of governmental constraints on her, and she fought for her program. So I think that the combination of her pioneering science and her administrative abilities and her loyalty to her staff, that identified her as a person to be put in charge. So I think the answer is yes. I mean, you maybe find somebody else out there, but she got the sweet program. That this is when major large scale satellites were still being built, and this tropical rainfall measuring mission satellite was really innovative, and it's been followed up now only recently with the so-called Global Precipitation Measurement Program, which again is measuring in the tropics in kind of a dual mode of humanitarian and scientific understanding. So yeah, she was first.
Let's see, we also have this great question from Adelaide, who says, thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I would love to hear your thoughts on Joanne Simpson's work on weather modification and how it fits into your own arguments about weather control and fixing the sky.
Okay, cool. I happen to have, since you mentioned it, I have Fixing the Sky right here. I was on a seminar this morning talking about that book. She was very innovative. She was an experimental meteorologist at NOAA. That was her job. She ran the experimental meteorology lab in Miami. And that lab would run her computer model in the morning, given the current measurements of the atmosphere, and try to predict if there would be convection that day. Then she would go out into the Florida flat, landscape, and they would fly and they would put the silver iodide seeding material into the clouds to see if their seeding was following the understanding of the model. She also directed the Storm Fury project, where they were modifying hurricanes and trying to reduce their wind speeds. But she hated the idea that the bureaucrats were trying to make rain. She was trying to make understanding. She was trying to understand the clouds better and actually do experimental work on the clouds to sort of predict what they would do before she did it. And she chafed at the bureaucracy that tried to operationalize that. She also chafed at the Navy, which was a co-sponsor of the Project Storm Fury, because the Navy wanted to make clouds work for them. They wanted the clouds to become more intense when the enemy was near, or to clear the clouds out when their fleet was in danger. And so they had a different operational mindset. And she was really quite angry with the militarization of her project. So I think it was truly she stayed consistently on the pure science side, trying to do the experimental work of prediction and not just the work of control.
All right, I think we have time for about maybe 2 more questions, because I see that it is 8 o'clock. So I have to pick 2 of these, which is a hard task. So you have a question from Robert. What was the central question you were trying to answer when you started this project? And did it change after you had spent time in the archives, especially after your encounter with her personal journals?
Yeah, that really that's a really good turning point for me. What was I trying to accomplish? I was trying to tell her story. I was also trying to make an incursion into the field of women in science without trying to be a survey of everybody that did something. There's a lot of books like that, sort of prosographical approaches to women. But I wanted to treat her as, and I think I identified her as, I said, my God, she is the best scientist. She's the best tropical scientist, not just a woman in science. And so that's the inspiration behind the book. And then I did get some questions from other seminars I've given about the emotional stuff. But I saw that, I showed it to my colleague, a friend of mine, that we run a book series together, and I showed him the diaries. He said, holy smokes, this is really, exciting stuff. It was exciting enough to have it fully transcribed and not published yet. There's also the possibility of a film adaptation. I've got some producers looking at the thing. And so that might come up, but that's still in the works. And so I think it was that emotional kick. I had done histories of Wilhelm Bjerknes, Carl Gustav Rossby, Harry Wexler, and before that, Guy Callender. And in all cases, I had very small amounts of their emotional lives. Usually they would write back to their family whenever they were traveling, but they didn't travel all that much, or some of them didn't. And I would grab onto those little things, and I made sure to put it in the books I was writing. But this time it was just like a cornucopia of emotional and psychological and aspirational writing. And so I do think that I think my next book might be called Thoughts and Feelings, and it might just be the diaries of Joanne. If anybody's out there listening, we might be able to do that.
That's great. And I love this last question from Dasan. So I think we're going to end with this, but
Okay.
If Joanne were alive today, how do you think she might have advocated for our leaders to pay attention to climate change?
What a great question, because there's a section in the book about that. And the climate change discussion has evolved. It's been around for a while, and she was around until 2010. So during her presidency of the American Meteorological, she spoke directly about that. And she never thought that it was not a gigantic problem, but she thought that our models were not well developed and our tropical observations weren't that great. And the role of water vapor was not that well understood, which is 4% of the atmosphere in the tropics. So she said that in her presidential messages, or actually she said it after she became more of a private citizen because it was so politically charged. But I think she took the high ground, saying basically you need a better model, you need a better observations, and you need to take care of other components of the atmosphere. So that's in there. I mean, there's a teaser in there. There could be a whole book about that. But I think she would be right at the front line talking about those things today.
Great. Well, thank you so much once again, Jim, for your time and for this lovely event. And thank you to all of you watching from home for spending your evening with us, or your morning, or wherever it is that you might be.
Thanks,
Please,
invisible audience. I really appreciate it. I was going to go back to my email address. Please write to me if you want. And jfleming@colby.edu.
yes, absolutely. And please feel free to learn more about the book and purchase First Woman on Harvard.com. I have put the link in the chat. You can also find it on our website. So on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, all located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, please have a good night. Please keep reading and be well. Thank you.